the erasure. The solution, if it could be called that, was as monstrous as the curse. How does a man erase his shadow? He could not cut it, could not burn it. It was absence. It was a hole in the light. The answer came from his own trade, from the nature of light itself. He spent a day in a frantic, manic whirl of activity. He went to a theatrical lighting supply store, spending a small fortune on equipment he barely understood. He bought high-lumen LED panels, industrial-grade floodlights, miles of cable, and a portable, gasoline-powered generator. He bought mirrors, large and small, and a carton of pure, titanium-white artist's gesso. He was going to flood the studio with light. Not just any light, but an omnidirectional, shadow-killing light. He would illuminate every corner, every crevice, from every possible angle. If a shadow was created by a single light source, then 1,000 light sources from 1,000 directions would cancel it out. He would create a space of pure, absolute whiteness, a visual silence in which a shadow could not exist. It was a theory born of desperation. He spent the afternoon rigging the lights. He set up the panels on stands, pointing them at the walls, the ceiling, the floor. He hung others from the exposed pipes. He arranged the mirrors to bounce the light into every possible shadowed nook. He sealed the windows with white poster board, turning his studio into a sealed white cube. The generator sat humming outside his door, a fat cable snaking under it, feeding his insane project. As dusk fell, he stood in the center of the room. He was pale, sweating, his eyes wild. He had smeared his own face and hands with the white gesso, a pathetic, primitive attempt to make his own body less of a light-occluding object. He looked like a ghost preparing for an exorcism. In his hand, he held the master switch, a multi-plug power bar connected to every light in the room. He took a deep breath, the smell of gasoline from the generator mixing with the chalky scent of gesso. This was it. Self-annihilation as salvation. To kill the monster, he had to kill the part of himself that cast it. He flipped the switch. The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. The room erupted in a silent, searing explosion of pure white light. It was a physical force, pressing against his eyeballs, bleaching his retinas. There was no color, no depth, no form. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, they all vanished into a uniform, blinding luminescence. He screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the sheer visual noise. He looked down at his own body. He could see it, but it had no shadow. The light was coming from everywhere. There was no direction from which it could originate, and therefore no direction in which it could be blocked. He was a floating form in a void of light. He had done it. A hysterical laugh bubbled up in his throat. He had won. He had erased his shadow. The umbra actuosa was vanquished. But then he saw it. A smudge. A faint, gray imperfection in the perfect white of the floor near his feet. It was small, no larger than a coin. As he watched, frozen in horror, it began to grow. It was not a shadow cast by him. It was the shadow itself, bleeding up from the floor like a stain, independent of any light source. It was defying physics, asserting its own existence. It pooled on the floor, then rose, flowing up an invisible surface until it stood before him on the wall, a man-shaped blot of absolute blackness in the blinding white room. It was more defined than ever, more real. The eradication attempt had not destroyed it, it had concentrated it, purified it. The shadow raised its arm and pointed a finger at him, not in accusation, but in invitation. Then it turned and walked across the wall, towards the one canvas he had left untouched, a clean, primed white square. Elias watched, paralyzed, as the shadow began to draw its final masterpiece. It didn't draw Clara. It didn't draw the crash. It drew him. It drew Elias Thorn in perfect, horrifying detail. But it drew him as he was in this moment, face smeared with white, eyes wide with madness, standing in a void. And then it began to add to the drawing. It drew a noose around the neck of his rendered self. It drew the rope trailing up out of the frame. Elias understood. This was the ultimate manifestation. The shadow was going to draw his suicide, and when it was finished, the drawing would become real. He had one chance, one desperate, insane chance. The text had said erase. He had taken it metaphorically. He had tried to erase it with light. But what if it was meant to be literal? His eyes darted around the blinding room. On a tabouret, next to a jar of turpentine, was a large, fresh block of kneaded rubber eraser. It was the artist's tool for correcting mistakes, for wiping the slate clean. The shadow was his mistake, his sin. With a cry that was part sob, part battle roar, Elias lunged for the eraser. The shadow, intent on its work, did not turn. Elias reached the wall, the drawing half finished, the noose tight around his illustrated neck. He slammed the soft, pliable rubber against the shadow's form. And it worked. There was a sound, not in the air, but in his mind, a tearing, screeching wail of nullified existence. Where the eraser touched, the shadow simply vanished. It did not smear or fade. It was deleted, as if it had never been. He rubbed frantically, erasing the shadow's leg, its torso, the arm that held the drawing finger. The shadow twisted, its featureless face turning towards him. He felt a wave of pure, cold hatred, his own hatred, reflected back at him. It reached for him, its fingers elongating into blades. Elias screamed and pressed the eraser into the center of the shadow's form, grinding it into the wall. He erased and erased, a frantic, chaotic scrubbing, consuming the darkness with the soft, gray rubber. The mental scream intensified, and then, with a final, silent pop of extinguished reality, it was gone. The last vestige of the shadow, the tip of its pointing finger, vanished. Silence. The blinding lights hummed. Elias stood panting, his chest heaving, the block of eraser in his hand now stained a dull, permanent black. The wall was clean. The drawing of his hanging was gone. The studio was just a studio again, a sterile white box. He had done it. He had truly erased it. He stumbled back, collapsing onto the floor, tears of relief and exhaustion streaming down his face, cutting tracks through the white gesso.